I completely blanked out. Hold on. Man, I was holding that in. Welcome to another special edition of the Thoughtful Gamer Podcast, where I, Mark, am going down my top 50 games of all time. This is an exciting one. We're almost there. Today we're going to go down my 20th through 11th favorite games of all time. Before we start on the list, though, with me today is Orion.
Hey, what's up?
Matt.
Hi, Marc.
And special guest Ben.
Hey.
And my lovely wife Amber.
Hi, everyone.
Who's also a special guest.
Yes,
You're
very
special. Before we start on the list, though, I want to do some honorable, or maybe we should call them dishonorable mentions. When I was creating this list, I actually did the list out to number 70 before cutting it down to the top 50. But here are some games that are popular and well-known that are outside of even my top 70. Just going to run through them real quick. We have Quantum, Firefly the board game, Pandemic, Jaipur, Sheriff of Nottingham, Betrayal at House on the Hill, Balderdash, Catan, Bang, and Machi Koro. So, doesn't mean I dislike these games. In fact, some like Quantum I actually enjoy. They just fell out of that top 70. Some of them, like Bang, I do not enjoy, and that's why they're outside of the top 70.
It's a pretty random little list, but I will personally say that I'm glad that Sheriff of Nottingham is in that list.
But Balderdash is awesome.
Balderdash was really close, actually. That's a fun game, especially the new versions they have where they have the different categories.
I tend to crush, like, the first round of that game and then never get another word.
Yeah.
So, Mark, I noticed that you didn't list Bananagrams. Does that mean that Bananagrams is in the top?
It's in the top
10.
I do not want to give that even the respect of a mention.
It's awesome.
Bananagrams is just horrible Scrabble.
Awesome Scrabble.
Bananagrams.
Mark just doesn't have a fast enough brain for Bananagrams.
Oh,
Yes.
It's true. I'm not good at fast. Well, I'm good at some fast games.
Dutch Blitz?
In that.
Spoons? Speed? No, you fail.
No, I'm good at set though. Remember set?
I don't even remember.
It's the one where you have the
right?
grid of like the shapes, the different shapes with different. We played it once at the Martinis. It's really fun, actually, and I would like to get a copy of it because it's a pattern recognition game.
All I remember is that you fail at speed.
Yes, yeah, I'm horrible at speed. I don't remember how to play that. Isn't that like war, but you smack each other?
No.
What?
That's Egyptian war. Okay.
Egyptian War is awesome, and
I don't
always
remember.
win.
Egyptian rat screw?
Yes.
Yeah, Amber's very good at these games, and I am not. But anyway, those are some popular games that are not even on my top 70, nevertheless my top 50. On the next installment, I'll go over some popular games that barely missed the list. But without any further ado, number 20. This might be a shocker for you guys.
Dun, dun, dun.
Pandemic Legacy.
Really?
All right.
All right.
I crossed
All right.
that off of my list when I was making the top 10, so I'm still good.
Oh, did anyone else put that on their top 10 guesses?
I put that on one of my guesses.
Oh.
I did not, because this is about where I expected you to put it.
Okay.
For me, I mean, this was my first Legacy game experience. And as far as a gaming experience, it's one of the best I've ever had. But it's hard for me to judge it because it's
over.
It's a different thing. Yeah, it's over.
Yeah.
That is the downside, is that we can't ever go back and play that the same way we did the first time.
Right. I would put it in, if I were to put it in a top 10, it'd be based on that board gaming experience where it's incredible. But as a board game, I would agree that Pandemic is not as good as many of these other games you've mentioned, and it's fancy Pandemic for that.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is that I'm not as big on Pandemic as many people. As I talked about last time, I like, for a Matt Leacock cooperative game, I like Forbidden Desert significantly better. And I'm not going to go into any spoilers here, but if you're very sensitive about spoilers, maybe wait a couple minutes. But I found that there are a couple criticisms I have with Pandemic Legacy because it was such a fun experience. We wanted to keep playing it over and over again to finish. And the overall experience of the campaign was great, but it's still Pandemic, which I think is pretty good, but not great. Although further iterations, like in the middle of the game, were actually more fun than regular Pandemic, I think. But that would be my one criticism, is that it still has kind of the over-calculation of Pandemic compared to something like Forbidden Desert, where you can do risk mitigation but not calculate the odds as specifically. And the other thing is that it tended to throw new things at you before you even had you could have any expectation of mitigating or countering them. So you might get it open up a new box and some new development would happen and it would screw you over and you'd be like, well, there's no way we could have predicted that or done anything about it. Yeah. So in some areas, I felt like the game was kind of playing us and things were just happening and there was nothing we could have done to prevent that or mitigate that.
Yeah, there's one in particular that I'm thinking of that was...
Not in a significant way, but I think just a couple occasions that kind of frustrated me a little bit.
I think that's part of the theme, though, is that fighting this infectious disease, you don't know what's going to happen next, and it can surprise you at times and take you off guard.
Sure, I think there was just a little bit too much of that it got a little bit frustrating, particularly when we're fighting so hard and making so many strategic decisions for things to just get thrown at us. And maybe that's inherent in the legacy aspect, but I think there are ways you could have gone around it. And from maybe it's part of the theme, but from a gameplay perspective, having things come out of nowhere and attack you basically without any way of preventing it is subpar game design. Even though it does contribute to the theme and the experience.
If it were a regular game, a lot of those moments that you're describing would have been huge downsides to the game. And this is where it's hard to judge a legacy game in the same way we're judging board games. But I think a lot of those same moments added great balance to a legacy experience. Where this game works, I think this game would work with groups of different skill levels, groups of different familiarities with Pandemic, and so on and so forth.
Well, it still has quarterbacking problems like Pandemic does.
It does have that.
Yeah. Or rather, it doesn't do anything to mitigate that. But it will be fun.
If you are 4 Pandemic stars, you're still going to have fun playing Legacy. If you're 4 people who have never played a co-op game, and you're just learning the rules as you go, I think you're still going to have fun.
Agreed.
Oh, yeah, there's no doubt it's an incredibly fun game. And I love the legacy concept. I love having permanence in the game, and I cannot wait to see what's going to be in the future for legacy games because of this. Like, I'm emphasizing the downsides because so many people and the board game community at large has rated this the greatest game ever made, and I have it at 20th. I still think it's spectacular, but not without its faults.
How excited are you for Season 2?
I'm more excited because I saw a sneak preview of the board, and it got me really interested in what on earth they're going to be doing here.
Wait, okay. No, I won't say anything.
I won't say anything.
Yeah, and another thing, like, this game monopolized our game nights and increased their frequency until we had played all the way through it.
Except for that last month. It took us, like, a month and a half of real time for you to ever come over so we could finish the game.
Yeah. I mean, it's making me really excited for Gloomhaven when I get that in the late fall, because that has a bit of legacy aspect to it. And Charterstone, the new game coming out from Stonemaier, which is going to be a legacy game where at the end of the game, instead of just being done with it, you have a full-fledged game, just one unique to your group. And then whatever else they're coming down the pipeline with in terms of legacy. Like, I think the concept of it and how they're going to iterate on this concept is great. And for that, Pandemic Legacy should really be praised, because it wasn't the first legacy game, but it was certainly the most popular one. Moving on to number 19, I believe the first of many games from our collective and certainly my favorite game designer, Vlaada Chvátil.
Vlaada!
The legend.
Vlaada.
And that is number 19, Galaxy Trucker.
Yay!
All right. All right.
Wow.
This is a surprise.
Really?
Oh, I mean,
I love Galaxy Trucker.
I love this game.
It's the best.
I wouldn't have thought you'd put it this high, but I guess we've seen from 50 to 20 now, so it has to be higher.
Yeah, I am actually very surprised by its presence in the top 20.
I want to play it. I mean, it's such a great, like, shortish, like 45 minutes to an hour game. It's bananas. It's absolutely nuts.
I'll say this. when a group of friends, when not this group, but when other groups of friends wants to play a game, I always mention it as an option.
Oh, yeah.
For some reason, no one ever wants to play with me. But it's just one of those games that you're like, this is just so much fun.
Yeah, and how the game works is that it's half in real time, where you are constructing a spaceship, or space truck, I guess, out of spare parts, frantically.
Literally from a junkyard.
From a junkyard.
It's a speed puzzle game.
Yeah. In a mad rush to finish this before people force the timer on you and run out of time. And then you truck across the galaxy and get hit by asteroids and get raided by space pirates. And you watch as your ship disintegrates as things pummel it in the empty vacuum of space. And you barely trudge along into the finish line with a couple of goods and half a spaceship.
And
Speak for yourself, Mark.
It always disintegrates. Always.
Not now. The main problem right now with it is that I think we're all too good at it now, and we lose that aspect, which means, Giesman, since you own this game, gotta hit up some expansions for us and make this game harder.
This game, the first time you play it, you will just get destroyed. And when you're introducing new people to this game, you need to figure out how to couch that, because if you don't warn them, I think it could lead to a really bad experience for what's a really fun game. For us, we all played it the first time all together, so we all got destroyed together and had a blast. And then from then on, when we introduced new people, we at least knew what sorts of things could happen and prepare against them, whereas the new person just has to go through it and get destroyed once.
Yeah, my sister hated this game so much. But it's fun even when you get destroyed.
It's just a hilarious game. Like, the whole premise is silly.
Yeah.
The components are silly.
I
The
think
rule
that's-
book is silly.
Just the way, so as, in the second phase of the game, when you're trucking through space, and someone draws a card that says an asteroid hits, you roll a die to see which sort of column it affects on your player boards, and then you go around to each player, and everyone draws the asteroid coming in, and oh, that part isn't protected. Oh no, I just lost a part. That means 10 other parts fell.
Yeah, so you imagine constructing the spaceship kind of on a grid with an outline, a spaceshipy outline, and then you're just constructing it out of, like, pipes and connective mechanisms, and it just looks like it was assembled together out of junk. And then it acts like that, usually. A lot of people think it's too random, but I think that's the fun of it. Like, I will beat a new player. It's not that random. It does take some skill in knowing the game. But even if you do just get horribly unlucky, it's hilarious. It's so funny, and you just mock people and have a grand time.
And I think there are a lot of good mechanics, too. Like, there's kind of a... Like, similar to Power Grid, there's the idea that if you kind of hang towards the back, the people in front might take all of the asteroids, and then you can jump to the front towards the end. I think there's some good mechanics that are interesting there.
I call this the hubristic catch-up mechanism system, because if you were the first to finish your spaceship and, lock it in and complete it, you can grab your starting position. So you can decide to go first if you're super confident in your spaceship and you just want to get bludgeoned by everything and think you can take it. Or you can kind of go toward the back, and then as people finish their spaceships, they just grab the positions that are next. So it's not like you're locked in. You choose where you are in the turn order, and the farther up front in the line you are, the more things will hit you.
And the more potential profit you'll make.
Oh, yeah.
If you have to have a really sharp build to go first.
Exactly. So it's based on how confident you are in your construction, but you always want to try to grab first just so you can grab all those goods. But if you are too overconfident, you will be wrecked.
One of my favorite things in Galaxy Trucker is the way that the building rounds are ended. They have this like sand timer mechanism that you flip over whenever anyone wants. It's kind of similar to the timer in Codenames, which is also a Vlada game, in that there's not really any prescribed point where you have to flip the timer over. It's just whenever someone wants, they can flip the timer over. And I think that's a brilliant a brilliant thing to do in a game, is just to let the players decide when they want to do something.
Yeah,
so
and
you
it's
can either
really
have
fun if you're trying to like speed through and rush everyone out. You flip the sand timer, and everyone looks at you. Is like, "What are you doing?
yeah,
I'm not done yet."
And then everyone has a half finished. Yeah.
yeah. It's great because depending on who you're playing with, you can either have like a very relaxed and very well thought out set of ships, or you can have these terrible ships that are just going to get obliterated as you go through these asteroid fields and get attacked by space pirates and everything. It's a great mechanism, and I think it does so much for the game.
Oh, such a great game. Moving on down to number 18, we have a double Vlada section of the list. I was trying to make an alliteration there, but I failed. Number 18, Codenames.
Codenames.
Ooh, I'm glad that I forgot to put this on my top 10 list now.
The best party game that I've ever played.
Agreed.
It's so good. It's, if you haven't played it yet, which would be almost surprising because it's, I believe, the most popular game of the last 2 years.
Isn't it also the most best or the highest best-selling game ever or something like that?
It's like $12 on Amazon.
Well, no, it doesn't have as many sales as like Monopoly, but it's of modern games. I think it's been the number one selling game of the last 2 years.
Okay.
Deservedly so.
Yes. This is a game, it's a word association game where you have a grid of a 5x5 grid of random words, and two people are the spy masters, and they're going to be leading the rest of the players separated into teams into trying to guess words that belong to them by giving one word clues followed by a number. So if there are two different animals that are your words out there, you could say animals 2, and then that would lead them to selecting those two animals or guessing those. But it's not as clear-cut and as easy as that, because oftentimes you'll have very tenuous relationships between the words you're trying to get them to guess. And most significantly, there's one word out of the 25 that is the assassin. And if at any point your team guesses that word, the other team wins immediately. And it creates this really fun, tense game. For a party game, there's a lot of sitting there in silence trying to think, but it makes up for that by having really exciting moments of surprise and shock and shouting at each other. And
this game might have the best post-game debriefing of any game.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
It's like, what were you thinking? That was the dumbest clue I've ever heard. Or all kinds of... There's almost as fun to talk about the game after you played it as it is playing the game.
Yeah.
I gave this to my mom for Christmas last year, and she finally learned it when I taught her and fell in love with it. And I got a text from her just a couple of days ago where she said, I taught Codenames to 10 of my friends last night. 8 of them are going to buy it. It's just, I think, almost universally loved.
Yeah.
It's so fun.
I've taken this game and taught it to the widest variety of types of groups of any game I've ever had. And it's worked in every single group. Like, family on one side that's silly, more serious family, serious friends, like coworkers. I think the brilliance of this game is how well it makes whoever's playing it shine, and just brings out these awesome moments that really kind of put individuals' creativity on display.
Yeah. If you don't like regular Codenames, they now have Codenames pictures. If you go to a Target, they have an adult themed Codename. It's called Codenames After Dark, I think.
Okay, that's just weird.
There's a Disney one coming out, I think, and a Marvel one. They have all these kinds of licenses, which I'm fine with because it's just bringing cash into CGE, Czech Games Edition, and they make amazing games. And so I think this is just going to be a cash cow for them to fund even more Vlada games and all these like great heavy Euros they do. So I think it's fantastic that it's caught on as well as it is, even if it's going to start being really derivative very quickly.
I'm honestly surprised it's this low on your list, and this is easily a top 5 game for me.
Yeah, I know you love it.
It's that good.
I mean, I enjoy it, and it's going to work great in any situation. It's just not as fun as heavier games for me. Like, the thing is, I like these bigger,
like
more involved games.
It's a 20-minute experience.
Yeah, I like these bigger, more involved games, and so when I think to myself, okay, which game is more fun to me? The lighter games are going to have an inherent disadvantage just because of my preferences.
Yeah.
Even though I think it's a brilliant game.
I will say, I played this with my girlfriend once, just the two. There's a way to do it as a two-person.
Oh, actually, I
game.
forgot to mention,
And-
that's the next release. They're doing a 2-player Codenames.
Okay.
It's called Codenames Duets. I think that's the next one going to be out.
Wow, cool. But even with Codenames, there is a set of rules. Basically, you're just challenging yourself to win with the fewest number of clues, and it was really fun. Just as like a couples thing.
Mm-hmm.
Mark and I would fail.
Yeah, Amber and I, our minds don't synchronize very well on many games.
It is hilarious to see whose minds sync with each other.
I'm also
Sometimes
very bad at code names. I'm awful. I rarely win. But I think, hands down, the best party game I've ever played.
Yeah.
Moving on, number 17, Battlestar Galactica. From Fantasy Flight. This used to be a lot higher on my list, but I think the last couple times we played it, it was kind of a dud. It's gotten... We have all the expansions, and I think it's gotten a little bit unwieldy with the way we're playing with the expansions, where it's just taking too long for us. And I think it's a game that can, if you don't kind of enforce going quickly on it, it can drag on a bit. But it's a great semi-cooperative game based on the television show Battlestar Galactica. And basically, everyone's in the Battlestar Galactica. It's a spaceship, and you're trying to jump or warp, I guess, a certain number of times to get to a destination before your food runs out, or your fuel runs out, or morale gets too low,
or just everybody dies,
or everyone dies. And so you have all these threats, and the turn structure is very simple. You can move once, you can take a single action, and then a crisis happens. And the crises are the real meat of the game. And it has a brilliant mechanism for resolving the crises because everyone's working together, but it's a crisis, so you can't work together perfectly. So everyone, in turn, throws down, face down, some skill cards of different types of skills. And each crisis requires certain skill types to resolve that crisis. And so once everyone has thrown all the cards face down, you add 2 random cards, you reveal them, and every card that is for the correct skill type adds to the number, and all the cards of different colors take away from that. And if you reach a certain threshold, you pass. If not, you fail. And sometimes the fail resolutions are very mean and very severe. And usually if you pass a crisis, nothing bad happens, but also nothing good happens. And just that kind of blind play, almost simultaneous play aspect to the game is, I think, a really good way of resolving it. It also is a semi-co-op game in that there are traitors, but you don't know exactly when the traitors will emerge. So there's like 2 rounds to giving out your loyalty cards. Most of the players are going to be loyal to the humans, but then there are going to be a couple of Cylons. But because it's split out into 2 rounds, it's entirely possible that for the first half of the game, everyone is on the same side and everyone's a human, and then 2 of them will be sleeper agents that convert over to Cylons halfway through. That, combined with just how thematic it is and how cool all the crises are and all the events, just make it a great experience that unfortunately has just been bogged down a bit too much recently for it to like hit my top 10, because at one point it was on my top 10.
Yeah, the greatest strength of this game is the theme. I'm a huge fan of the show, and I was a huge fan of the game because of how much it felt like you were in the show, like you were reliving it. I would say maybe the first 10 times I played this game, I thought it was absolutely fantastic. Maybe it's getting a little bit old now, since we are familiar with so many of the characters, the cards, the actions, we kind of know what's coming up. But still very worthwhile to buy for the first 10 or so plays. Yeah,
still a great experience. Although I would recommend getting either the Pegasus or the Daybreak expansion, because there's a mechanism. The game works best at 5 players, and there's a mechanism in the base game. If you don't have exactly 5 players, that's just dumb. and either one of those expansions will fix that no problem.
Going along with the player count, it's definitely better at certain player counts. And under the some scenarios, I think in the Daybreak expansion, it adds Cylon leaders, which I would not recommend. I've played it a couple times, and it just ends up with this one lone wolf person who is doing their own thing, and it just doesn't work as well.
Yeah, the expansions can be a bit hit and miss. There are good aspects to each of the 3 expansions. Sometimes very good aspects, like I think the Mutineer aspect in the Daybreak expansion is great.
Yep.
But there's a couple of duds in each of them. But still, even if you're just playing the base game, it's such a fantastic experience.
It's hard for me not to compare this game to the Resistance, because, I mean, the meat of the game is kind of figuring out who the Cylons are, and at least doing so soon enough so that you can have a better chance of not failing in reaching your final destination. Mm-hmm. And in that comparison, I mean, some of the obvious things are this game is just way less elegant. And
well, it adds Resistance is only that. This has
right.
an entire game around it.
And, and I think my feeling is that the game itself is only fun because of the trader aspect. Like, it's not... It wouldn't be a challenge if you knew that everyone was working together.
It's not as tight of a puzzle.
Yeah.
But it has... It's not so much a co-op game in which you're playing against the game as you're playing against everyone else and their suspicions.
Yes.
That's why...
that part is really good.
That's why the skill check thing works so well, because you could all be on the same side, but because you have to play face down, you don't know for sure, and you often end up wasting way too many cards on a skill check just because you're not sure about everyone else.
So for this gaming group, I think BSG sort of replaced the Resistance as our trader game of choice for a while there. And I think for good reason, because the mechanics do work really well, especially the crisis resolution thing. That's just great. And you don't know if the Cylon put in the card that's going to detract rather than add towards the goal. And and furthermore, having never seen the TV show, I still feel like the theme is riveting.
Yeah, I don't think any of us had seen the TV show before we played the game. Oh, you had seen it, Amber?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan.
I didn't know that. I thought we were watching it together for the very first time after we played the game.
No, Mark, I was introducing you to the show.
Oh. Well, anyway, the game inspired me to watch the television show, at least the first couple of seasons. We never finished it. And it's still engaging even if you don't know anything about the show. You just need to know that there are Cylons, and Cylons are traitors. That's it.
I will say that one of my favorite parts about this game is how unique all of the characters are. The way that they pull characters from the TV show and give them abilities and also disabilities that coincide with their characters is brilliant. Like Starbuck in the TV series is this ace pilot who has a big problem with authority, and they reflect that in her player card, and that she's by far the best pilot that you can have, but she's also really easy to throw in the brig.
Yeah, and with the characters, there are just a bunch of different aspects of the game, political, military, that just have cool character-driven mechanics.
Yeah, it's a great one.
This game, I would say, is still in my top 10. It hasn't grown stale for me. Maybe that's because I played it less than you guys have, but I love this game.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Moving on to a newer game we got that is also deeply thematic. We first played at PAX East, and that is Robinson Crusoe from Portal Games.
That was fun.
Which is a co-op game. I guess Forbidden Desert wasn't my favorite pure co-op, because this is a pure co-op.
Liar.
But it's about kind of the Robinson Crusoe situation where you're stranded on a desert island. There are a number of different scenarios that you can play around with that require you to do different things. And the core of the game is this kind of push your luck aspect, because for most of the actions, if you want to say gather some resources on the island, you can send one of your workers, or you can send two of your workers to do that safely. and just gather the resources, or you can send one of your workers and then roll some dice. The dice will determine whether or not you succeed at that action, whether or not you take a wound while doing it, and most interestingly, whether or not you draw one of the cards associated with that type of action. The cards will typically maybe give you a choice, or maybe something will just happen to you. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, but then you slide it into, or shuffle it into this deck that's kind of the timer for the game, and whenever that card returns, something bad is going to happen to you, unless you prevent it. So, for instance, in our first game, I think it was Orion ate some berries, or was it me who ate some berries? Was it me?
You ate the berries.
I ate the berries. I went out foraging, and I found some berries, and I ate them. And then, an hour later in the game, this card pops back up, and I got a stomach ache, and I started puking everywhere. And it's really fun thematic things like that. Like, one time someone...
A lot of them the first time you hit it, it's something good, like you find this cave and you get some food, but then a bear attacks you later, or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, and really interesting consequences that make sense. Like, if you take the option of exploring the cave, you get something good, but
you have to pay for it later.
You provoke the bear.
Yeah. And so it's full of all these kinds of consequences for your actions in a really satisfying way. In addition, the exploring's fun. You can build up your shelter. You can build palisades to prevent against wild animal attacks. When you discover animal tracks, you can then go out and try to hunt them with your weapons, which you have to keep maintained. And it's a really tight cooperative puzzle, but one that is executed in a very thematically rich way that I think is just beautiful. I think it's such a good system. Unfortunately, they're releasing another game very soon called First Martians. That's the same system, but set on Mars as kind of like you're like the first explorers on Mars and you're trying to survive. And it looks to be really cool, and I can't wait to get that one too.
Are there Martians?
I think they confirmed that it's all hard sci-fi.
Okay.
So there's not going to be aliens.
That's really cool. I'm looking forward to that
Yeah.
aspect. But yeah, so Robinson Crusoe, it feels like the heaviest co-op that I've played, I think. Like, it feels like a Euro.
Well, yeah, it's literally a Euro. They're a Polish game design studio.
Okay, yeah, and I mean, and it's worker placement. I don't know. It's heavier than Forbidden Desert, that's for sure.
Oh, sure, yeah. It's certainly... It's not incredibly difficult to understand, although if you do get the first edition of the game, the rulebook is the worst rulebook I've ever seen. The second edition has a substantially better rulebook.
When we played at PAX, I found a quick learn-to-play guide online which helped clarify a lot of things and streamline our understanding of it. So if you do get the first edition, look for some resources online.
But you should be able to find the second edition very, very easily. But it's not that difficult to learn. It's just you have to be very careful about optimizing your actions. And it's a co-op game that I think reduces quarterbacking just because there are many things to do each turn that are good, and you have to discuss to try to optimize.
Yeah.
And there's unknown risk in some of the actions that you can't necessarily predict for.
Yeah, there's a lot of seeing how far you can push your luck and how many risks you can take, and weighing that against the possible consequences. And I think that might be a theme of my list of games that I like a lot, is games where you do have that kind of risk mitigation, and not necessarily so many games where you have perfect information or near perfect information, but games rather that use their themes to make you take risks or make you do calculations on probability or see how bold you want to be. And I think this game exemplifies that perfectly.
The one thing we'd note is we've played the first two scenarios and won both of them pretty handily. So we'll have to see how the later ones shake out.
Yeah, I keep hearing it's brutally difficult for a co-op, and we haven't had any trouble yet. So I'm still waiting to see where the brutally difficult scenarios are.
And there's no kind of mechanism for regulating that. Oh, I guess there is. I mean,
there's some stuff in the rulebook.
You can add what's the guy? Friday is the kind of helper guy,
yeah.
which basically gives you an extra action punt. So there are some ways of regulating the difficulty. But
And those are the two easiest scenarios, but they weren't that challenging. There was a really fun moment at the end of the first game where all of those consequence cards that we talked about came back and all hit Mark, and he ended
At
up
exactly the same time.
all in one turn, and he was 1 health away from dying. So I suppose in that sense we almost lost, but we had been controlling the game for 3 rounds and just happened to draw all of those cards at once.
Yeah, so it has really exciting moments like that. And I want to play more and more, and
Yeah,
I want to
you
get
know-
through all these scenarios.
you know, we've played a lot of games, and I think this game surprised me with its cool mechanics more than any game that I've played for the first time in the last few months. Just because like the action deck is just great. How when you shuffle the cards in, they come back to bite you at a later time. Like that's just so brilliant. The die that you roll when you do a build action or an explore action or something like that do different things independently, it's brilliant. It has great mechanics.
Yeah, throughout the game, if you're just analyzing the mechanisms of the game, you just keep thinking to yourself, well, yes, obviously that was the right thing to do from a design standpoint. Like, it seems all so obvious now that we've played the game, but it's the first game that has put it together like this, where you have consequences for your actions. And the way they do it's just such an elegant, simple, obvious way of doing it.
So we've only played a few times, but for potential replayability, there are a lot of things going in its favor. A bunch of scenarios, 9, I think.
Yeah, I think they might have official ones you can download as well.
And so there is a central platter of tools available that you can research or build technologies.
Yeah, those are randomized.
And so, they're the standard ones, but then about half of them are random. And then all the cards in the game, there's so many cards. Every single one is thematic, but you're only going to see like a 10th of them in a given playthrough.
Yeah. So there's a lot of replayability there. And you need to come over more and bring it, since you own this game, so we can play it more.
I've been hoarding it because I want Amber to play it more, but
Yeah.
her board game playing time is limited.
All right. Well, anyway, let's move down to the next game on my list. Another new game that we actually played yesterday or last night. That is just another brilliantly designed game. And that is Food Chain Magnates.
Yay!
Which I think we all loved on the first time we played it. It's a game about being a food chain magnate in a small town. It's a very deep Euro game that's surprisingly simple to learn. Like, it's not that difficult, but man, is it deep. And does it require a lot of planning ahead and kind of very complex thought structures. And I love it. I love that aspect of it.
And it requires all of that, but you can still have such great fun if you just play it thematically and choose how to run your restaurant and how to run your fast food chain and do it the way you want to do. Even if you fail, you have a great time.
And it's really funny the situations it creates where you plaster a billboard right outside a house to make them want your burgers or Cokes or whatever. And it can stay there for potentially the entire game, and that house will forever want that food item.
It almost makes fun of advertising in the real world, which is just fantastic.
Oh yeah, I wrote a review on this on thethoughtfulgamer.com, and I go through all the different scenarios in there why this game is absolutely hilarious. So if you're interested, read the review. I think the simplicity of it and the depth combined just make it a great feat of design. And it's just tremendously fun. The coolest aspect of the game, and it's another one of those obvious design decisions that I'm surprised I've never seen before. There may be some game out there that has it, but I haven't seen it, where you're literally just building a corporate management tree with cards. So you start with you, who's the CEO, and you can manage 3 people, and you hire new people, and you can hire more managers, you can hire chefs, you can hire advertisers, you can hire recruiting people, and they just create this literal tree in front of you as you expand your business. It's just a fantastic idea, and it's executed perfectly in Food Chain Magnate.
Earlier, you guys made it out to sound like it's just like a walk in the park fun game. by a lot of measures, this game is brutal.
Oh,
so,
it's mean.
So
Oh, yeah,
yeah,
of course,
don't
of
be
course.
fooled. Like if you suck at organizing your management tree, and you don't have the right, you don't try to corner a certain part of the market, and you can get left out and just sell nothing, and you're basically out
Okay,
of
so
business.
let's be clear. I was left out, and I sold almost nothing, but I had a blast because the management tree that I set up was clearly such poor management, but I laughed because it was real world management.
Yeah.
Yeah, the game is incredibly unforgiving. Not only in that there aren't any catch-up mechanisms, but also because your first few actions set the tone for the entire game. And if you mangle a couple of those first 5 or 6 turns, you are probably going to lose.
Yeah.
But you still might have fun because it's hilarious.
Amber wants you to play this game.
I lost miserably, you guys, and I still had a blast.
This happened to me last night when we played. I just mismanaged my first couple turns and spent the rest of the game catching up. And I managed to do all right, but Mark still had 2.5 times the amount of money as me at the end.
Yeah, I will say too, I didn't mess my opening up, but I really did very poorly in the mid game. I was always a turn behind. In Mark, you lowered your prices significantly in one of the last turns, and I sold
cleaned
nothing.
up.
I sold nothing that entire turn, and I had so much food. It is really important in this game to keep your pulse on the market and to make sure that you know what other people are doing, because if I had seen both you and Bubba buying the discount manager, I probably would have at least considered getting one of my own. It's brutal, but it is so much fun.
It's such a good lesson in market mechanisms, and at the same
Yeah.
time, it's just so much fun because it mimics the real world. And you can laugh at yourself, and you can laugh at the world along with
It mimics the real world, but then you also have zeppelins collecting drinks.
Yes.
Wait, that doesn't mimic the real world?
Yes.
But no, you're right. It is very cool. You feel like you are actually a handful of food chain magnates in this small little town, and it has cute little roads, and you have cute little management trees.
And billboards right outside your window.
Yes, and billboards.
It should be made clear that
Gardens.
billboards in this game only work when they're directly outside of a house.
Like plastered on the window, basically.
But I love the game, and I it's going to be a staple in the
Yeah.
collection for, I think, a long time.
I think this is a game where after you played a bunch, you could end up with kind of set openings of, oh, I'm going to go for the boom strat, or I'm going to go for the early train strat. And that might...
It might make the game dull, but it could also make a really interesting metagame.
Right, so in the way that chess is very predictable, and you know there are these openings, now in chess there are hundreds of openings, but if you just look at the top, half dozen or so, there are the Roy Lopez or the King's Gambit or the Queen's Gambit and things like that are these known openings that both people are thinking about ahead of time, and yet it's still a very deep game. Not to say this is a 3 millennium old game that will persist throughout time and culture, but I could see how it, with those, even given those kind of set opening strategies, still allows the possibility of different competitions and interesting choices down the line.
Yeah, and I think because the way that the game is with the different map setups, that there will be different flavors for this game every time you play it. I don't think it will become one of those stale games.
But speaking of games that we need to play more often, and now can't because the owner of the game has left our apartment to a different state, one of the best games of all time, a classic, Agricola.
No. No.
This game is very divisive among us.
It's a good game. I'm pretty bad at it, and it is... Boy, this is a harsh game to try to navigate.
Yeah,
but,
speaking of unforgiving.
yeah, whew.
I need to try this game again. It's been a couple years for me,
Yeah.
and at some point I just decided this game isn't fun. I'm just getting wrecked. But I want to give it another try.
It's so good. It's the Uwe Rosenberg classic when he switched from making games about counting beans, literally, to his kind of trademark heavy Euro worker placement style where you have to feed your people. And that's really the reason why Agricola is so harsh, is because you have to feed your family at the end of each round or each segment of the game, and food is incredibly hard to come by. It simulates the 14th century sustenance farming society. So you're planting farms, and maybe you'll get a pig, and maybe you'll actually get some vegetable seeds, and then, oh no, you have to feed your family. Better go fishing for a couple of fish so you don't starve and have to go begging. But somehow, well, there are a couple things it does that are just brilliant. The first thing is that you have a standard setup for the number of players you have that give you your basic actions. And then each round of the game, it unlocks a brand new action. And there's some predictability to what actions will be unlocked, but somewhat random as well. So you can plan ahead a little bit, but it also expands the game broadly and makes it more complicated as you play. So it's a much simpler game at the start, but as you expand and your farm expands, the options available to you expand as well, which I think is just fascinating and brilliant. It also has these cards that will give you occupations or minor improvements you can make to your farm. And the best way to play the game is to basically draft these cards at the beginning, and they kind of set the strategy for you. But they don't give you massive advantages. They give you very marginal advantages. And you're never going to do a move in Agricola that gives you a massive swing. They just give you very small, marginal benefits. And at the end of the game, you've made a farm.
Right.
It's just very slow and very tedious to get there.
The whole game is about doing just enough to survive and a little bit extra. And that's all you can do because you only have a few workers, and the action spaces are so contested, especially in larger player count games, that it's really difficult to manage what actions you get to take and doing enough to be able to feed your family and do something to move towards improving your farm.
Yeah, like Mark and Orion just described, this game is about subsistence farming, and that's just not fun.
It's so fun.
I
have won this game, and I did not have fun.
Right. This is one of those games that you have... One of those games where you have a bunch of actions available to you, and none of them feel right. None of them feel like you're making enough progress to be worth it. You're always feeling like your family's gonna starve.
Oh, exactly. And that's why I love it.
Yeah, and yes, and that is what makes it good. But, it's also very brutal if you don't like that.
I might be able to agree that this game is objectively good thematically, but I don't enjoy it.
Well, I do, and that's why it's number 14 on my list. Anyway, moving on, number 13, finally, after Rebellion at 41, I believe, or 40, we have War of the Ring at number 13. We debated this extensively on a couple podcasts ago, but I think War of the Ring is just a perfect thematic experience that beautifully displays the story of Lord of the Rings in board game form. And I love it.
This is a wonderful game. I think this is almost exactly right to where I'd put this, kind of in the mid-teens or so. I love this game. As Mark said, the theme is excellent, how you feel like you're replaying the Lord of the Rings and you're moving these armies around, and as the free people, you're desperately hoping Frodo makes it to Mount Doom before all of Middle-earth is covered by the Shadow armies. It's a blast.
Yeah, and just a couple of highlights. It's a two-player asymmetric game. One side is playing the Shadow armies, so Sauron and Saruman and the Easterlings. The other side is playing the Free Peoples. But there's this dual game going on where the Fellowship is trying to advance the ring and get it to Mount Doom, and that's one aspect of the game. And the Shadow player is trying to corrupt them. But then you have the entire military aspect of the game, which has its own win condition for each side as well. So you have to balance these two aspects of the journey, and just the way the game is set up, it incentivizes and pushes toward a very similar narrative to the original, to the Lord of the Rings, but in a very exciting way. And it's almost a nostalgic experience for me when I play it. It's that good.
Yeah, and all the cards you play are really, as you said, nostalgic and thematic to things that happened, and it feels so great to play the Ents and attack, or thank and crush Saruman, or play Grond, Hammer of the Underworld, and siege down the last human capital, or something like that.
Yeah, and like I said, we talked about this a lot more on a previous podcast, so if you want to hear more about this game and Star Wars Rebellion, listen to that.
Yeah, with that said, I think that discussion we had on the previously released podcast, if anything, it narrowed the gap between Rebellion and this game. I would like to see both maybe in the 20s. I think that's where I'd put them both. It is a great thematic experience. I'm not convinced that it holds up as a game in this range. It's a great game, and it's a lot of fun, but 13 is pretty high.
I would like to say, when we talked about Rebellion, I vowed on the podcast to crush Marc as the Imperials. I have since fulfilled that promise and wiped the floor with him, so much so that he has rethought all his thoughts on all his opinions on the balance of this game. So we'll have to see.
Just a little bit. We got to test it.
We'll have to see where it goes from here on, but it is at least possible for the Imperials to play well and win.
Yes. Anyway, moving on to number 12, a brilliant Euro game, also thematic in its own way, and that is Suburbia.
Wow, okay.
That's high.
This one is great.
It's good. I was not expecting it this high on the list.
Oh, really? I love Suburbia since the first time I played it. Like, I just adored it.
Yeah.
As the name implies, each player is building a suburb, and basically it's built out of these hexagons of maybe like a community park or a residential development or a landfill. You know, basic suburban life things. And when it's your turn, you have this market of different hexagons, and the first couple are just the cost listed on the hex, and the ones further back have additional costs associated with them. And you buy one, you slide the rest down, and then you fill up the market again. And when you buy them, the most fun part of the game is that when you place a hexagon on your suburb, it will trigger 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 different reactions. So maybe it will give you a single income, but it also gives you an income for every other blue hex next to it. Or maybe it'll give you a person for every airport in the entire game, so you have to pay attention to everyone else's boards. And that very simple framework of just buying a hexagon, placing it in your play area, and then triggering all of these rewards or detriments in some areas. It's just such a simple and just purely fun game.
Yeah, I compare this one and Power Grid a lot. I like them both equally, I think. Suburbia is probably a little bit lighter, a little bit more easy to get into. And it's all about community planning. And I really enjoy it because you can be planning your community and it mimics zoning in real life, which is both fun and interesting and annoying at sometimes. Very, very annoying.
Yeah, because landfills are very lucrative, but you cannot put any houses next to them or you get bad things happen.
But who wants to live next to a landfill? Nobody.
Exactly.
Exactly.
I think one of the really interesting points in this game is the way that they handle... You have two sources of income. Well, I guess income in the sense. You have your reputation, which draws people to the city, and you have your just financial income, and which gives you money. And as you gain more people into your city, both of these go down throughout the course of the game. So it's important to...
Sort of an overhead thing. We got to talk about the market and the way the tiles are selected. Yeah. You know, one thing in this game is you can see everyone's suburbs, and there's also interaction between suburbs. Like if Marc has an airport and I put an airport in, we both benefit. And in that way, it's incredibly thematic. Every tile makes sense. When you put in an airport, everyone with an airport benefits. When you put in, a restaurant,
it diminishes the value of all the other restaurants.
Yeah. It's great. But this market basically is a sliding thing where a new tile will come out, but there's a surcharge that's pretty hefty. But as people select tiles, everything slides down to where that surcharge goes down and down and down. So if it's a great tile, I might see that someone 2 turns ahead of me will benefit immensely from that. So I might have to pay that surcharge to take that tile off the market. And that's interesting, but in that way, it does become very interactive because I have to know the other people's suburbs.
The other hilarious part of this game is that when you take a tile off the market, you can either place it in your suburb and get whatever benefits, or you can flip it over and turn it into a lake. So you could bulldoze the law office and make it a lake, or you could bulldoze the housing projects and make them a lake in your town. And whenever you place a lake, it's a nice, attractive thing, and you get money for every tile surrounding it.
Oh, lakes are the best.
Yes. I remember the last game we played, we ended up laking and destroying like every single school that was ever
right.
in the market.
That's right.
What does that tell you about our society?
We're
Like, well, there's another high school. Let's make it into a lake.
The ending of this game is a lot of fun, even if you lose. You get to the end of the game when you run out of tiles, and then there's a number of public and private goals you're competing on for bonus population at the end. But then you get to look down in your suburb and see this ridiculous thing you've created of, you're like, how is this even, like, why did I put that next to that? And what even is this that I've created?
Yeah.
But it mimics the real world. Communities are not perfectly planned.
Yeah,
Sometimes
exactly.
you do have a suburb next to a dump.
And what more can we say? It's a great game.
Oh, for the top 10 list, I had this at number 9, so I missed out just barely on that.
Yeah, you gotta put an X there.
Oh, yeah, I need a
missed
pen.
one. All right, moving on to the last entry on this list, number 11. We have a game that I know Ben hates for no apparent reason, because it's an amazing game,
This is false.
and that is Seven Wonders.
Oh, I had that in your top 10.
Barely missed it.
Barely
missed it. Getting like numbers 12 through 8, I'd say, was 12 through 8 could be almost in any order because it's a bunch of really solid games. Seven Wonders is a drafting game. It's a fairly simple one too, where you're going. It has like this kind of civilization theme, but it's the basic drafting idea of you have a hand of cards, you take one of them, and then you pass it along. But it was one of the first modern board games I played, and I became addicted. I think you might have been there, Amber, when we first played it at the Senpai's house, right?
Yeah, and I agree. I was also addicted to it at first. From there, it has waxed and waned. Sometimes I hate it, and sometimes I love it. Even to this day, sometimes on any given day, I will hate it or love it. I will want to play it or not want to play it.
Yeah, but for me, I would play it at any time. It's quick. It takes like 45 minutes, regardless of how many players you have, because everyone is playing simultaneously. And it's just a fun puzzle where you're trying to build up your resource income engine in the first age, and the whole game split into 3 ages. And then you try to combo certain things. You have cards that just give you points. You have science cards, which are very good if you get a lot of them, but not very good if you don't have very many. There are different ways to get money and trade with your partners or interact with the people next to you. There's a whole military mechanism where you're kind of passive-aggressively, almost like an arms race, building up and trying to beat your neighbors in military strength. It has all those little aspects of civilization, but mostly to me, it's just a very fun drafting puzzle. And I've talked before in the Sushi Go entry about how drafting, I think, is just an inherently fun thing. And this game does it beautifully, and I don't think I'll ever get tired of it.
Well, the drafting mechanic, I think, is naturally good for players of any level. And the decisions you're making are never more complicated than choose one of the cards in your hand.
Yeah.
And so even if you don't know the game through and through, you can do that. You can see how military works. You can see how science works. You can see that, I forget what the blue cards are called. They have a point value. And the interesting part of the game is more when you know all these things well and you're trying to beat out your opponents on the margins.
Well, yeah, I think it's interesting at both levels.
Right.
It's interesting when you first start out and you're trying out different things, because the game is designed as such that even if you're choosing almost randomly, you're going to get a decent amount of points, and you're still going to accomplish things. But then once you start to understand the interactions between the cards, the game gets even better.
Yeah.
I would say the hardest part of this game for new players is just learning all the symbols, especially if you add the expansions, particularly Cities, I believe.
Yeah.
Has a lot more symbols that can be hard to understand, and so even now we still have the reference sheets out whenever we play the game. I love this probably second only to Marc, and I would play it almost any time, but that's the biggest barrier to entry, I would say.
Yeah, it's a bit of a barrier to entry, but the reference guides they provide are very good, and all the symbols make sense. There's just a lot of them. So once you kind of get a very basic understanding, you can figure them out very easily.
I would say I have a lot more fun playing this game with either all experienced players that I've played with before, or with all beginners. And the game changes drastically depending on which group you're playing.
That's actually a criticism that I wanted to bring up, is that if you have a mixed group, then the people who really know the game can take advantage of the fact that cards aren't being...
This is especially true in science. Like, when the new players have the opportunity to pick science cards, maybe they don't, and that benefits the more experienced players extremely well.
Yeah. Cards that aren't obvious to everyone that will benefit one player or another are going to slip through, and the more experienced players are going to get an unfair benefit from that. And that kind of throws off the whole balance of the game, I think. So that's where I think I agree with you. It's better with people of the same level.
I would almost entirely disagree with that. I've played it with all kinds of groups, mixed gamers and non-gamers, and it's always been a hit. Like
it's always fun. It's always fun, but it's a worse game.
To say that the better player is going to win a game isn't a criticism.
Yes, but I've won as the better player, not based on a good strategy, but based on a kind of cheap, just doing something that I know that the majority of people aren't going to catch.
Yeah, and you and I have played in the same groups, Marc. And
it's a nitpicky criticism for an excellent game. Look, I enjoyed winning with 80 points of science, but I don't look back on that as a good gaming experience.
Well, the thing with Seven Wonders, yeah, that'll happen once, and then it'll never happen again with any particular player.
I think with drafting games in general, it helps if people are roughly the same level, because then they have a similar sense of what's competitive, and they won't let one person have all of one strategy of cards.
But I don't think that's unique to drafting at all. Any well-designed game, that's going to happen, I think.
I would say that it's more apparent in drafting games because knowledge of what you can do is a lot more limited in drafting games, unless it's a really light drafting game like Sushi Go. This is part of the reason I don't like Seven Wonders as much, is that I haven't played it nearly as much as you guys have. And whenever I play it, I feel like I'm always at a huge disadvantage because I don't know what the cards do. It doesn't really have the charm of a light drafting game for me, but it doesn't have the depth of a serious civ building game either. Those things combined with my general lack of experience with the game, playing it with very experienced players makes the game a lot more unattractive to me.
Well, you guys are all wrong, and Seven Wonders is the 11th best game of all time that I've played.
I've been nitpicky. I think this is probably about the right spot.
Good.
It's a great game.
Agree with me.
It'd be a little lower on my list, but
I would say in the 30s. Like, it's a good game, but
it's an amazing game. We need to play more, and we just need to either drag Ben into it or sneak it around him.
I would certainly be down for playing this game more often. I remember we were playing the base game online for a while over Christmas one year and must have played easily a dozen games in a long weekend or something.
Oh, it was so fun. Although I wish the expansions were in that online implementation, but they weren't. And that's our list for today. Tune in 2 weeks to catch the top 10 greatest games of all time that I've played. That last condition is important. And tune in next week for a regular Thoughtful Gamer podcast. Thanks for listening, everyone. Please check out the website at thethoughtfulgamer.com. Please rate and review this podcast so we can get more visibility. And hit me up on Facebook or Twitter. I love hearing from people. It's always really fun, especially as a new website where I'm just kind of starting out. It's great to hear from people who enjoy the content. So please subscribe, and we will talk to you again next week. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks, guys.
Don't you mean talk at them?
Mark, I'm
More.
so sorry for bumping the mic. I did
You
not
gestured
mean to
right
do
on
that.
top of it. It's fine.
I go all over the place when I'm talking.
Oh, man.